Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, Erin.
Hi, nice to be here.
So we're excited to sit here today, and Erin's going to be sharing a little bit about something that we've heard the themes this morning. I think it's resonated in speaker and speaker again. But innovation and, within innovation advocacy marketing across your omni-channel tactics. And I think Erin has a lot of really great insights in her own experience that's only going to build on some of just the points that we've heard sparingly throughout this morning's sessions. We'll start with introductions first, if that's okay. We'll get into it. But as mentioned, my name is Sam. I am a senior client partner at IZEA. We are a full service influencer marketing agency, and I sit and specifically help lead our CPG and shopper division, which brings me excitement to be talking to Erin, who is the general manager of Royal Canin. And that's how I picked it up on our prep call last week.
That's what I say to you.
Okay, perfect. And so Erin, why don't you just give a little bit of not only your role at Royal Canin now, but just your background and your experience across CPG, I think is incredibly interesting. So
Sure.
tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Of course. So it's great to be here. Thank you guys for having me. And my name's Erin Caston, the GM for Royal Canin. I believe it's Royal Canin if you're Canadian. And I can't pronounce the French pronunciation, even though I've taken 5 years of French. But I've been with the company for about 2.5 years. So I lead our omni-channel business unit. And my background is really diverse. So I've had the great opportunity to work across a multitude of different categories and companies and cultures. I actually started on the sales floor to pay my way through college and was going to become a lawyer and decided not to become a lawyer. So I ended up somehow in fashion in New York instead and worked for Gucci during the Tom Ford days in the late 90s. I worked for Prada when it was a family-owned business. And eventually decided that I had to go back to reality and went back to school to shift into marketing. And I had a chance to start my career in marketing at Frito-Lay. So Linda, who I think is hosting us today, was one of the first people that I worked with on Lay's potato chips, met a great group of people and really had a chance to work on a really small part of Frito-Lay with a tiny little brand with $50,000 in budget, and then worked on Lay's, one of our biggest brands, and had a great experience. After about 2.5 years, I really missed the fast pace and the trend focus from fashion, but I really wanted to stay in consumer goods. So I shifted over to L'Oreal, where I spent the next 10 years of my career. So had an opportunity in the first 5 years to reposition brands, focus on innovation, work across every category within beauty. And then the last half of my career, I really focused on digital transformation and worked on acquisitions. And at that time, I became really intrigued by two things, really. I thought we were doing a great job at L'Oreal with digital transformation, but others were doing it better. So I was really curious to learn elsewhere. And then I also was really intrigued by founder-led brands and those brands that were disrupting categories like beauty by really pivoting in exactly the opposite direction of what we've been trained to do as marketers for a long period of time. And that's what really led me to the next two roles. So I moved over to the agency side, which was vastly different. I worked for Mindshare across the Unilever portfolio and all of their new acquisitions. So had a really great opportunity to learn media from incredibly talented people. And then a friend from Frito-Lay actually brought me over to Kind. So I shifted over to Kind when it was really kind of ramping up for investments. We worked on the acceleration strategy, the first innovation plans at scale, the first media and advertising plans as well, and had a chance to work very directly with a really amazing founder and learn firsthand really how he thought and how he scaled a business. From there, I went back into beauty. So I moved over to Coty and had a chance to really work through a time of incredible disruption for the brand. We had integrated P&G Beauty, but not incredibly successfully. And so I worked on the turnaround strategy for our fragrance business on brands like Gucci, Tiffany, Chloe, really worked on getting those on track to scale that part of our business, and then shifted over to CoverGirl and Sally Hansen. So it was the global CMO for our consumer brands at the time. And I had a great opportunity to reposition CoverGirl and really launch our clean strategy. Most recently, so for the past 2.5 years, I've been working on Royal Canin, or Canin, and moved over into a GM role. So as a CMO, one of the challenges and great opportunities was how to lead full stack and how to navigate through the challenges as we went through COVID of leading performance marketing, but also really needing to be a brand-led marketer. And so the opportunity to move into a GM role was an incredible one because I was able to kind of own all of those pieces while also taking on sales and supply during a really challenging time. So I've been there for 2.5 years, and it's a brand and opportunity that I've really loved.
Yeah. And I think something across your background and why I think it's pertinent to our later discussions today is you've mentioned just an awareness of all for brands that can be disruptive in new entrants and categories. And so for those who are not familiar, I want to establish who is Royal Canin, what is the brand, and who all you are before we kind of start talking about the marketing efforts and how you're reaching your audience.
Sure. So when I had the opportunity kind of come across my plate for the brand, I had never heard of it before. And it's one of the biggest brands within Mars, and it's the fastest growing. So it's this incredibly beautiful brand that's not very well known, which is a great opportunity to scale. The brand was actually originated in the south of France about 50 years ago, and was founded by somebody named Dr. Jean Cattery, who is a veterinarian. And he became really frustrated because he had numerous German shepherds at the time who kept on coming back to his practice and who had eczema that couldn't be treated. And so there are all these recurring issues with these dogs not being healed, and he became very frustrated. And he was inspired by the Hippocrates saying that food should be your first medicine. And he developed what he called the yellow soup at the time, which is not incredibly appetizing, but it was this highly effective formula that really treated the skin condition of German shepherds. And it was developed, with a deep understanding of the functional benefit, the functional needs of that type of animal and that breed, and also what would actually have lasting results. And what's interesting is, 50 years later, and even post-acquisition from Mars, the brand is still very much rooted in first, therapeutic diets. So, really understanding the needs of cats and dogs to have the best formulas available for them when they're in moments of crisis. And then also breed specific diets. So really understanding the functional difference between a French bulldog and a Maine Coon cat and, a German shepherd, and really being able to develop the best formulas for those pets. One of the things that I just add on top of that is that our model has been focused on really partnering very closely with pet professionals. So because we were grounded in, being founded by a veterinarian, we work very closely with veterinarians and with pet experts like breeders and groomers in terms of our go-to-market.
Yeah. And I think too, today there's so many brands within the Danone family, but also Royal Canin, you're a product with a purpose. And I think that's really, really valuable and something to translate to the audiences. And the point you alluded to at the end of working with veterinarians and building upon that a little bit. Today's theme is innovation and what we're talking about. And I think your innovative piece has come in how you have taken what we're calling advocacy marketing, or what's termed advocacy marketing. And I think it's powerful of how you're able to use your relationships with vets and relationships that you've built, across the category, and take that to the consumer to give them a reason to believe. So I want you to talk about a little bit more about that, and also, how you're differentiating yourself from others in the pet food category by doing those things to connect with your consumers.
Sure. So I loved hearing about what a mission-based company Danone is before, and we're also very similarly a very mission-based company. Our focus is on improving the health of cats and dogs. And we've always been a pet first versus a consumer first brand, which is, kind of seems very rational, but when you think about it, it means that we haven't spent a lot of time in the past working on packaging copy or claims or all of those things that marketers are typically very focused on in order to convert a consumer. Our advocacy model is very much rooted in the way that we were founded, but also in the way that we go to market. So we overinvest in one-to-one relationships with pet professionals, from veterinarians to breeders to groomers and to shelters. And that's really, driving our model. It's where we spend the majority of our marketing spend. And the intention is, we know that we have incredible diets, and when a pet professional sees how they work, they're going to become a very, very strong advocate for us. So that's really built into the way that we go to market, and really the way that we structure ourselves as well. We have 2 business units that are focused on just working directly with professionals, one focused on veterinarians and one focused on breeders, groomers, and shelters. My focus is on omni-channel, so I'm the other side of the house. But really, our focus is on, first, how do you amplify recommendation? So how do you get the benefit and the knowledge of those pet professionals and amplify it across different channels? And then, because our mission is focused on, improving the health of cats and dogs, subscription is really important to our model, because we believe if you have higher subscription rates, you have pets that stay on diets longer, there's more compliance, and there's better health for pets. So a big part of my strategy is how do you drive subscription rates, which for us are around 60 to 70% plus, depending on where we're selling.
And you're making it sound easy. So I want to also ask, what are the challenges that you've had in obviously amplifying that? And I think something we've talked about today is also the authenticity of all of that and the advocacy piece of it, and letting consumers know that this is, this is authentic. This is your brand mission. So what are some of the obstacles you've come across, especially in your omni-channel role,
Sure.
when taking that approach?
So one, actually, as a build on the previous conversation, we went through a 2-year supply chain crisis. So I joined month 2 of that supply chain crisis. And because we're so focused on the health of cats and dogs, I've actually spent most of the last 2.5 years dialing back marketing instead of actually amplifying it. So we had to make sure that pets that were in need of the right diets had them. So we prioritized our therapeutic diets first. The second thing in terms of just challenges of amplifying an advocacy model is that if you think of where we were born, it's in France, and that's a pretty small market, and amplification of a recommendation works really, really different there than it does in a very large market like the US or China. You just don't scale in the same way. There's more fragmentation and more complexity. So a lot of the work that we had to do was really just educating on, what is competitive, what's a perfect digital store within, the US environment, what type of content is needed. How do you communicate when you're a pet first company, but you have to, convince a consumer, not just a pet professional. So really getting that content right and having the right benchmarks was key. What we found is within pet care, there's good benchmarks, but not great, and really a lot of opportunity to kind of up the game. So we looked first at pet care, but then we also looked at skincare and at beauty. And even, retailers like Sephora, who do such a great job of driving advocacy, so that we could really learn how to kind of change the model and improve it. The second thing is that, I think, amplification is expensive within the US market. And so we had to make sure that we were spending the right amount, that we were in the right channels. And then the last thing I would say is that, a lot of what you do with an advocacy model is you end up giving up some of the control over your brand. So you really have to know who you are as a brand very distinctly, and you have to be able to educate your partners on, on how you're different and make sure that they feel it as well, because you need that message to be carried through your partners. And so, it requires obviously, a lot of clarity in terms of who you are and who you're not, but also that loss of control, which, we've seen some of the impact in the market today, can be really challenging for a brand to deal with.
Yeah. And I think especially as I sit on a social expertise, that loss of control is often a necessary evil into success, especially in our channel as things are moving so rapidly and evolving. And just also that loss of control of understanding that what's happening in store, what's happening across all of these other channels isn't copy and paste over to what you're doing across many different pieces. So it really is that strong brand identity that's going to tie your common thread together.
You're totally right. And I think if you think of like younger generations and Gen Z in particular, they're much more responsive to a non-branded message and something that's presented through an advocate. So absolutely, like you have to be comfortable with that loss of control. And it's actually a really big driver of authenticity and connection with some consumers.
Yeah. Especially that. And I think that's an interesting point with just the younger generations. And as we're talking about like future-proofing your brand against future-proofing your brand for survival, basically, and acquiring that new audience. It's something that I think Royal Canin, like sitting there and how are they reaching that younger audience and the content that they're going to serve and the messaging that you're applying, it's going to help authentically tie into Gen Z as they're more environmentally conscious. They're caring that they're contributing to places with, to brands that are making a cause and an impact. And I think they are voting with their dollars. And that's something that an advocacy model is paying right into, is being able to show them that directly, at the shelf. And I would like, can you expand on that in a way that is, what ways are you innovating within that advocacy model? That how are you understanding and reaching that Gen Z consumer today?
It's a great question. We actually had a chance to go to South Korea to learn. It's one of the most Gen Z, highest populations of Gen Z consumers, one of the most digitally native. So we actually went on like a trend safari within South Korea to learn. And interviewed about 30 Gen Z consumers across the world one-to-one. So had a lot of learning there, but there's a couple of things that I've learned. One, within pet care, what's really interesting is that there are major generational shifts in beliefs. So older populations or more traditional populations really see a pet as a pet and exactly what you'd expect. The pet sleeps on the floor, it goes outside. For millennials, a pet is family. And for Gen Z, a pet is an extension of yourself, and it's an extension of your identity, and sometimes, a boost for your mental health. And so what's come along with that is just an incredible investment in pets by Gen Z. They spend a significantly larger portion of their income on their pets. But beyond that, the investment is really like education and making sure that they truly understand what's best for their pet. And so a lot of what we've done in terms of innovation and going to market for Gen Z is just really understanding the consumer and then making sure we're, where they're looking for information, but not in an interruptive way. It's not about, yelling the loudest and saying, we're here, this is what you need to know, but really connecting with them when they're looking for information. So certainly on social channels, it's really key making sure that we're delivering that message with advocates, that are relevant to them and that really are a good fit with our brand. In search, we know that there's really distinctly different behavior in search and where they're spending their time. So making sure that we're showing up in the right way. And then, thinking of like in store and the environment that we can create for them, because there has been a resurgence of returning to brick and mortar over the past year. We've developed a proprietary food finder where we have people who can help them find the right product for the pet. It can be really confusing when you have a portfolio of 750 products. And then also working with partners like the American Kennel Club, which is an absolute expert on breeds, and really making sure that we work with them on education and tools in order to reach consumers. The last thing I'd say is just, a lot of the way that we work with retailers is needing to educate and actually make sure that message goes through our retailers in a way that's going to help Gen Z consumers. And so we spend a lot of time on education with like Chewy and their CSRs, a lot of time working directly with veterinarians who might be in a Petco or a PetSmart to make sure that they can help consumers too, who are much more involved in their pet's health.
Right. And meeting that generation and that consumer when they're ready to consume the information, standing there in front of the veterinarian at Petco looking for their recommendation.
Totally.
And I think that's spot on. What should other brands consider before adopting an advocacy model? What have you learned and obviously kind of taking this and ramping it up now in the last couple months? What's kind of what is heated as a good lesson before you really dive in?
Yeah, I think I think first is it's a long game strategy. It's not a short game strategy. And so you need to be able to hold your own against performance marketing metrics and understand that there's not a ROAS that you're going to show in a short amount of time that's going to prove out. And it's a different way of marketing. So you really have to be in it for the long haul. I've definitely seen brands that are in and out. And I think as a consumer, there's a BS factor where you can really spot it. And so really important to make sure that if it's a strategy you're employing, it's something you're going to stick with for a period of time. The second is, particularly in a market like the US, it's incredibly important to know who you are, which we talked about a little bit before. You need to be really distinct in the way that you're showing up with your advocates to make sure that your message comes through. Because if you're using the same advocates to deliver the same message in a highly cluttered market, it's not going to be sticky enough and it's not going to stand out. So those are the two things that I think are really most important to focus on.
Yeah, I think there's the advocacy and the experience piece, but then there's also the advocacy and the personalization piece as you're talking to, which only comes with the long game and being able to then personalize an approach because consumers are sitting back and they're either taking advice from experts or they're taking advice from someone who looks and acts like themselves.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a really powerful thing to create across the ecosystem. I want to open it up for questions. I believe we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to open it up if there's any questions for Erin on, their work or any specific initiatives that Royal Canin has had over the past couple years. And if not, I can ask her some more questions too, but.
Somebody had threatened to tee up a very hard question for me, but I don't see them raising their hand.
Perfect. Yeah. I'll ask you an easy one then, because I know you mentioned this in our prep call and I wanted to give you a chance to share it because I just thought it was a great initiative. But what's one of your favorite things that when we're talking about just being an advocate and good causes for a brand that Royal Canin's been a part of?
One of the ones that I love is called Puppies for Parole, and something you'll never read about probably unless you're deep into a veterinarian journal. But we found that there was really a missed opportunity where there are a lot of shelter dogs that did not have the training that they needed. And likewise, prison inmates who are in the St. Louis area who have lost some connection and empathy over time, frankly, by being long-term, parts of the prison community. So we've basically paired dogs in need of training from shelters with inmates, many of them who are actually in prison for life. And we've had them train dogs, and we've actually placed a significant number of dogs. And there's also been an amazing product of seeing incredible increases in empathy and connection and behavior among the prison inmates as well. So it's really like a very mutual connection and program that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to your point, something that necessarily isn't as broadcast as widely as it could be, but just makes a real impact.
It won't be on TikTok.
Yes, it won't be on TikTok. It doesn't need to be on TikTok. I was to wrap up then,
Sure.
what has your attention next? Like how are you going to continue to innovate, and what do you have your eye on to move the brand forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the areas is really on that amplification of recommendations. So if you think of marketing innovation versus product innovation, how do we explain that we're recommended for a reason in a way that's really distinct from our competition? How should that show up in the voices of, a breeder, a groomer, a veterinarian who's really relevant to our consumers? So I think we'll spend a lot of time there. The other area is going to be on breed diets. So there's been I think 14 million new pets within the US over the last year or two. Lots of new breeds. I know I've seen them inundating our park. So opportunity to really innovate there. And then on therapeutic diets, our approach is really to continue to learn over time and make sure we're constantly improving our approach. So you'll continue to see really customized therapeutic diets launch as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm trying to become one of the new pet owners, but I need to get the other person in my household to agree. So
It's like having another child.
Yes, yes, it is. Well, Erin, thank you so much for just sharing your experience and a bit about the brand. And thank you all for listening and engaging in our conversation.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.